Welcome to The Investor, a podcast where I, Joel Palafinkel, your host, dives deep into the minds of the world's most influential institutional investors. In each episode, we sit down with an investor to hear about their journeys and how global markets are driving capital allocation. So join us on this journey as we explore these insights. So cool. Yeah, so excited to have our guest for today. It's Nathan Lian from Pareto VC. So Nathan, I actually met him through our Slack channel, and it's been great to just meet new people through all different channels, right? It could be on LinkedIn, it could be Slack, it could be in person, and realize that we're in New York and never met each other. So happy to meet you at least virtually for now, and then we'll catch up in person when we can.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Yeah, it's very, very serendipitous that I came across Sutton and, joined the community. It's been great.
Awesome. Well, let's jump into it, Nathan. So let's talk about your early career, your background, your education. And it sounds like you guys are doing a lot of stuff in the healthcare space. So walk me through your career, your academic background, how you landed at Pareto and all the different, journeys before that.
Totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a windy path. I started back in high school, going to early college, doing a lot of synthetic biology and computational biology research at the Craig Venter Institute and the Supercomputer Center in San Diego. Mm-hmm. And then went to Columbia and did the classic Columbia, not really sure what I wanted to do with my life switch, which was investment banking. So I started my career officially in aerospace and defense and logistics banking. After just over, the classic stint there, kind of realized that one of the things that I missed about doing research and also just, being a little bit more curious, I was feeling like what was glaringly missing was this ability to take something to a checkpoint and then take it over the line. I think, when you're in the investment bank, a lot of what you do is you get a deal over the line, you get an IPO done, and then you kind of wipe your hands and that's it. I wanted to be a lot more intimately involved. And so I jumped over to the startup side, joined a consumer fintech company called Bridget as the first kind of business hire. And then very quickly moved over to another consumer fintech called Mate, where I kind of built up a lot of the growth marketing function, moved through strategic finance, and then sat in the office of the CEO doing a lot of partnerships, running all of our fundraising efforts, doing a lot on the finance side, just given my background. And, unfortunately, we wound that company down in beginning of 2023 and ended up doing a lot of soul searching and realizing that what I really loved doing was building and meeting founders. And so spent the better part of 2023 actually taking various companies, finance and go-to-market orgs from 0 to 1, and then eventually joined Pareto earlier this year to sit on the investment team and on the venture studio side. And then to double click there a little bit into what you were saying earlier, I would say as a firm, we do a lot of consumer investments and enterprise, just sort of classic, what you would expect from a family office. But increasingly, we've been thinking about, what is the way to get the most compelling wedge and the most compelling kind of leg up over the competition, and also where do we think we can make the biggest and have the biggest impact, and that is increasingly proven out to be deep tech. And biotech is an area that we're really focused on, just because there's a couple of really interesting tailwinds now from the consumer side with Ozempic and Wegovy and the GLP-1s, and then also Huberman pre a lot of the scandals that have come up, very much so brought the consumer into the health and wellness space. And so it really feels like this idea of how do we live healthier, longer, more fulfilling lives is a place that we want to invest and build. And so that's where I'm very focused and lead our efforts here.
And tell me a little more about the background of the founder. So it sounds like the founder was an entrepreneur, and then I guess he set up his own family office. And what's interesting with the family offices, I know a couple family offices that have set up their own venture studio, and they just kind of funded different ventures and scale them to revenue. So can you give us a little background on kind of the team and the founder?
Yeah, so the founder I founded a few companies,
Hmm.
but made a lot of his money, yeah, both through those companies, but also through some really interesting initial investments in the consumer fintech
Hmm.
landscape.
Yeah.
And then, from by way of the companies that we've exited and have built, or have been a material partner in,
Hmm.
Misfits Market comes to mind. That was something
Yeah.
that we kind of
That was the
were,
yeah, that
were
was a
in.
company where you can buy where they sold kind of like
Yeah, that's
ugly
that's
vegetables,
right.
right? Like, yeah.
That's right. That's right. It's a very elegant solution to a very
Hmm.
simple problem, and I think
Yeah.
that's where we found a lot of success
Hmm.
early on. Is kind of what are those niches that we could go into? Goody is another example. Link Money is one that is doing quite well now, and so that's really where we've been able to get a lot of quick wins. We're
Hmm.
very very good at executing. We've built a lot of companies, and so we've spent a lot of time there. Now that we've come into a little bit more capital and a little bit more liquidity, the focus is now on the deep tech
Hmm.
ecosystem. But traditionally, most of our backgrounds come from the consumer enterprise and AI worlds.
Yeah. And in terms of deep tech, what are some of the sectors that you guys are excited about?
Yeah, so as a firm, we're pretty sector agnostic, but I will
Hmm.
say the other investors very much so like um, AI, which kind of everyone likes, but also robotics.
Hmm.
So a lot of the computer vision applications of AI ML, more traditional, not necessarily
Hmm.
generative.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I do still like AI and robotics as it pertains to biotech, although I'm more looking now these days at therapeutics. But AI comes in when you think about there are some really interesting platforms for drug discovery that leverage AI in ways to predict drug development or predict the most efficacious and the safest ways to build therapeutics that we couldn't do before. And
Hmm.
so those are becoming much more interesting as an application of AI. And then from a computer vision perspective as well, there's examples of how can we make lab work more efficient from an
Hmm.
observations perspective, right? I think a lot of people generally think about workflow automation with AI, but there's certainly a lot of things that we could do with computer vision as well that just
Yeah.
have never actually been applied to the biotech world, and that's where we're seeing the
Hmm.
gap as well.
Yeah, there was a company that that could look at different scans and detect cancer, and like it's essentially the
Yeah,
same thing that a human does, right? So as a radiologist,
totally.
what do? You look at the scans and you see if there's like a couple circles, right? And those circles could
Right.
indicate that there's a cancer, but like, computer vision could do the same thing. So I feel like sometimes it's not a problem of the innovation and the ability to do it, but
Absolutely.
sometimes there's political issues with like the hospital
Totally.
not being able to bill,
Totally.
doctors for like those expensive procedures if a software can automate
Totally.
that. Yeah.
There's a lot of these sort of misalignments and incentives within
Hmm.
hospitals, which is why a lot of people are focused there, I think. That being said, I actually feel that the more interesting applications are like these are interesting, but
Hmm.
they're a little bit more obvious. The ones that I'm even more interested in on the computer vision side is how can you do continuous monitoring for wet lab experiments with mice, right? Like any
Hmm.
sort of thing where you give them a therapeutic, the natural transition is once it's tested in mice, then you can get the green light to test it in humans for safety and then
Hmm.
efficacy later on. These mouse experiments are very expensive and it takes a lot of work, and the observation there is kind of ridiculous. And no one has thought really to use cameras in order to monitor mouse behavior, both from
Hmm.
a physical perspective, but also just there are ways that you could use algorithms to understand how behavior actually translates to something going on deeper in the body. Of course, it doesn't
Hmm.
completely remove that. But again, that's where maybe robotics becomes interesting, is
Hmm.
how can you use robotics to take samples in a way that's more efficient, more unified, and that completely reduces the need for a human to do some of these lower lift tasks and focus on the things that actually move the needle. So again, it's the same philosophy as what
Hmm.
you're seeing on the workflow automation side with replacing. Replacing might be a negative word here, but like augmenting, customer support, marketing,
Hmm.
sales are kind of the functions that you're seeing as the first ones that are really getting this attention from AI. The
Hmm.
same is true for lab work as well. Every industry kind of has these very menial tasks that I'm a little bit more interested in. The politics of selling a computer vision algorithm to a hospital to do cancer detection is certainly an interesting use case, but it's
Hmm.
not the most compelling for us since a lot of people are tackling it right now.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And then, one thing that I'm excited to learn about is this PH fellowship that you guys build
Yeah,
out. So, can you share
yeah,
a little more about that, and how is that? Because I know you were taking in some applicants. So, how does the
yeah.
cohort work? I thought was really cool is you give them some funding to kind of go out and
That's
create the
right.
company. So, you're looking. I'm
That's
assuming
right.
you're looking for people with like a PhD that are really looking to kind of just go out and be an entrepreneur. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly what we're thinking. I think
Hmm.
that the kind of painting the broad strokes and then getting into the tactical is one thing that we very much so observed is outside of certain hubs. So let's take the
Hmm.
US as an example. Cambridge and the Boston area and then the Bay Area are very much so hotspots for biotech and life sciences.
Hmm.
You can theoretically group San Diego in there as well. Now, as an alma mater, with Columbia as my alma mater and living in New York now for nearly 10 years, it's very apparent that there's a lack of infrastructure for the biotech and the incredible research that's being done at the New York City institutions, right? You've got
Hmm.
incredible research. You've got Columbia, you've got, Memorial Sloan Kettering, Mount Sinai, Cornell, NYU, Albert Einstein, the Rockefeller, and the list goes on. But there's no real research that's being spun out and commercialized in any sort of meaningful capacity. So that very
Hmm.
much so kicked off the whole inspiration for starting the fellowship. Now, the
Yeah.
fellowship exists because, kind of like what I was saying, there's two things at play here. One is the infrastructure doesn't exist by way of it's very capital and regulatory intensive to spin out biotech companies. And the second thing is a lot of people just don't know that it's an option, right? You talk to the
Hmm.
PhD students and the postdocs at these universities, they naturally think that the best path for them is to go into consulting or hedge
Yeah.
funds or banking. And
Or just
so
work at
we really
Johnson and
want to
Johnson, pretty much, like work at a big
exactly,
corporate company.
or go to industry there. I
Hmm.
mean, why not? And
Hmm.
but the ones that want to kind of get a little bit more of that, that fulfillment that comes from you did this
Hmm.
research, you in your mind you did the research because yes you thought it was interesting, but two,
Hmm.
more likely than not you wanted to improve patient outcomes,
Yeah.
and right now you don't really have the opportunity to do that.
Hmm.
And so for us, it's sort of low risk on our end. We give the cohorts that come in 200,000 each, to basically take and de-risk the academic, what we call basic science, and
Hmm.
begin the process of translating it. And so you then get to the point where other firms are more willing to fund it because you've proven out certain modalities, you've proven out a
Hmm.
mechanism of action, you've proven out safety, whatever it may be. We work with each of our teams in order to make sure that certain milestones are hit so that they could raise a much more significant seed round after
Hmm.
they finish the program. Broad strokes, it's around 12 months, but it depends on,
Hmm.
therapeutics might take a little bit more time versus medical devices might be a little bit faster. They're near term revenue opportunities, things like that. So there's a little bit of nuance, but that's generally how we've thought about the fellowship.
Yeah, but I feel like the personality you need to find is like someone who's a PhD that deeply has the research background, but is also kind of like
Yeah,
a hustler and like can build teams and
totally.
is like a
But you
CEO
know what's
type, right?
beautiful about this is, yeah, absolutely, is
So is that
what
hard
is
to
really
find,
elegant.
like that combination, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's two things at play here. I think
Mhm.
the hustle and then the commercial acumen, I think are kind of two separate things. The commercial
Mhm.
acumen, to your point, is a little bit harder to find. But on the hustle piece, the reason why I think actually PhDs are very interesting but often overlooked is because they lack the commercial. But if you
Mhm.
think about it, they run experiments every single day, and almost
Yeah.
every single day their experiments fail. And
Yeah.
so they've proven that they have the grit and the creativity to figure out how to get around some of these issues. So I actually think that they make some of the most phenomenal founders. Now,
Yeah.
to your point, so much of founding a company is being able to sell, whether that's to recruit, to
Mhm.
raise, to get revenue. And so that is a little bit harder. But what I'll say is it's coachable. And a lot of, especially the folks who are already thinking about leaving their PhD programs, are better at framing. But at the end of the day, it's
Mhm.
sort of, you don't need to be the most commercially adept in order to be able to be a good biotech CEO, insofar as, the most traditional exit is to pharma. And you can train someone how to frame things in a compelling way. I think for these types of founders, most people look for kind of speed to insight and relative sharpness as like, am
Yeah.
I willing to partner? And so you get a little bit of leeway there, although certainly you don't want someone who's totally socially awkward who cannot pitch.
Mhm.
But again, for the most part, it's coachable. But we do, for some of our founders, we'll bring in CEOs who have been on the industry side, whether in biotech, early stage biotech, or big pharma, to bring some of that more sales mentality.
And then how many companies are you looking to create a year? Because there's like, so you're doing the cohort once a year? It's like a one-time.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's branded as a cohort because it's the easiest to kind of think through. But and the reality is it's actually rolling. And so for us, really, it's whatever project that comes in that we find particularly compelling, we will reach out and we'll get moving. I mean,
and walk me
there's
through the
quite a bit
process. So is it kind of top down where like you guys kind of ideate on like a problem and then you
Great
recruit
question.
the team? Yeah.
Yeah. So no, this one is the other reason from a expertise perspective why the fellowship was particularly interesting for us is we don't come from traditional biotech backgrounds. No one on our team has a PhD. We certainly have a network that is very strong, but we wanted to get exposure to the most compelling research. And so we're not the ones actually creating the ideas themselves. We are kind of opening up the gates and sourcing really compelling research coming out of labs and asking them to apply. And then from a very tactical process perspective, they apply, and then we effectively tap into our network of advisors who come from, they're pretty much experts in any field that you can think of. We will have access to them, and they help us diligence certain projects and the ones that become the most interesting. By the way, interesting for us really is, you know how when you do an early stage investment, the biggest thing you diligence generally is the founder and the team. Yeah, we look at that, but actually what we care a lot more about, kind of to my earlier point, is the science sound and is the market opportunity there? Because we believe that we could train folks on the rest. And so they come through the program, they get access to our entire network. We have resources built out for how to launch companies, how to think about milestones, what you should traditionally think through when you're building either a biotech, a devices, or a diagnostics company. And then at the end of the period, we'll help with the IP negotiations with the university, which is one of the most complicated, convoluted things that most firms aren't willing to touch. So that's another kind of value add that we're hoping to provide by providing our own counsel to work with the tech transfer offices so that we can either wholly own IP or get an exclusive license, and then try to negotiate royalties in as compelling and founder friendly of a way as possible.
Yeah. I guess most of the universities want some type of revenue based royalty.
That's right.
Yeah. And is it usually in perpetuity, or is it like during a fixed amount of time?
Yeah, it's a great question. So that part is all, I would say the things that are generally fixed amongst the top universities is most of them will want some sort of equity ownership up to a cap. Then it gets then you can start getting that, diluting them out with like a very, very, very small fixed fee, like in the sub 10,000s. Everything else that is flexible and up for negotiation is royalties on the back end, both the percentage and the time frame. I would say into perpetuity is a bit on the aggressive side, but the beautiful thing is you could theoretically frame it as like the university will never actually be able to have it into perpetuity just by nature of the fact that patents expire. So, you could potentially shorten it to the point where you get, only 5 years or so, or you can do it for the length of the patent. Either way, though, you can kind of work around that in the long term.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And then, I think, partner with the universities is helpful because a lot of times they have the wet labs, they have like the bioreactors and stuff. I mean, what's cool about SOSV has like bioreactors and stuff, right? Because they do a lot of, so do you guys partner with any facilities to kind of have some of that wet lab space?
It's a great question. And so the reason that a lot of these other programs have to have a wet lab space is because the labs themselves are funded by non-dilutive funding versus dilutive funding, and they're all nonprofit grants. So theoretically, no translational work can happen within the confines of the lab. And so that is why other firms have to have a wet lab and pay millions and millions of dollars up front in order to get everything set up. For us, we actually inject capital into the labs themselves through the university.
Hmm.
so that it becomes, we can continue to use the facilities
Yeah. So it's kind of
in
like
a very
flexible
compelling way.
space. You could probably get
It's
fractional usage whenever you need it,
Well, you don't
let's say.
even need fractional usage is the beauty. You basically will get a postdoc or a PhD student from a lab, and you're just working with their PI in
Oh,
order to get
perfect.
the funding, you know?
Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
nothing about the operations have to change in any
Mhm.
sort of material way. It's purely just funding with the understanding that eventually it will be translational.
Got it. Yeah, that's helpful. And then what are some opportunities that you see coming up in the future on the deep tech side in terms of like life science? We've seen a lot of
Yeah, it's a great
food
question.
innovation. We've seen a lot of food innovation, right? I mean, using
Yeah.
bioreactors. So kind of, and then I've seen also like fabrics and materials used from mushroom tissue and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of
Yeah.
like alternative materials utilizing synthetic biology. So
Totally. Yeah, I think synthetic biology presents a lot of interesting opportunities for more consumer applications, whether
mhm,
that is, sustainable food, sustainable fabrics, and sustainable goods. I think for me, what is most interesting actually, and for the firm, is we're very much so leaning into this concept of longevity. And what I mean by that very much so is kind of how can we think about ways in order to improve the healthy lifespans of humans. So
mhm,
instead of, the last 10 years of your life being crippled and with cancer or neurodegeneration, how can we set folks up for the most amount of success, both through behavioral changes? You look at any research and you'll see that companionship, without a doubt, is one of the most important things for a long life, like truly healthy, long life. And then it's sleep, it's nutrition, and it's exercise. And so, how can
yeah,
we start to induce this sort of behavioral change, and are there companies building there, and
mhm,
then all the way through to, as we think about, for people with spinal cord injuries, how can we help them regain motor function that will
mhm,
ultimately go to sort of neural rejuvenation, neural reprogramming? How can we reconnect neurons and lean into the natural neuroplasticity of the brain to allow for mobility to happen again?
mhm.
So we're really kind of investing along the entire gamut of kind of health and wellness, and that's where I'm the most excited these days.
Yeah, I think also there'll be extensions of the body in the future. So like if you're
Absolutely.
crippled, like to your point, there could be kind of a augmented exoskeleton that people could use to
Absolutely.
kind of
And
just supplement like their walking abilities.
Absolutely. I mean, what's really compelling here, right, is you have the classic BCI, brain computer interface, of like basically creating cyborgs, right, and leaning into
Yeah.
the science fiction thing. The other piece that's actually quite interesting is, even, and this is something I don't think a lot of people knew, at least certainly I didn't before I came in, is
Hmm.
people have done hand replacement surgeries for decades, where
Yeah.
someone's hand literally gets severed and then another like donor hand from a recently, you know, unfortunately deceased individual can get reattached to the body, and the body just knows how to connect all the neurons in a way where you can regain motor function. So you don't even need to
Wow.
go for exoskeletons or things like that. We are looking at exoskeletons and thinking about how that can help augment movement, especially for paraplegics.
Yeah,
But there
paralyzed
could
people.
be a Yeah, but there could be a way for um, true neural stimulation to actually restore movement. And
Hmm.
though we have a few companies in our portfolio that are doing some really, really, really interesting things. Also, restoring memory for people who have Alzheimer's. Thinking about
Hmm.
neurocognitive disorders of how to stimulate certain parts of the brain to sort of um, remove the like different trigger certain biochemical pathways that can kind of suppress um, uh, depression and anxiety and all of that. It's quite incredible what some of these people are working on, and of course, for some of the more aggressive ideas. The U.S. Department of Defense is certainly also quite interested in how can we protect our warfighters and
Hmm.
help them rehabilitate, or keep them in, cryostasis or biostasis, if you will, between getting transported from the battlefield to a clinic? Is there a way to basically keep them in this sort of limbo state of life and
Hmm.
death instead of
Yeah.
letting them, pass? And so there's just incredible work being done in that side, and that's where I'm the most bullish on for the
Yeah.
deep tech.
I think on the consumer side too, I mean, some of the stuff that like Brian Johnson is doing is pretty interesting as well, because
Sure,
he's
sure,
got kind of a whole discipline around obviously like going to sleep, right? So I mean, he
right,
pretty much says going to sleep is like going to a meeting. You don't want to be late. You got to be,
absolutely, yeah, right,
you got to be in bed by 10 p.m. So it's definitely like
right,
kind of treating it with respect, and
totally.
also like the whole. Go ahead. I think you were going to say something.
No, yeah, I was just gonna say, for us, it's the very interesting thing is we're also thinking a lot about psychology, and the reason is because you get patients who have hypertension, who have atrial fibrillation, who, if they don't take their meds, will get a
Hmm.
stroke or a heart attack and die, and they will skip doses, which is insane. But you get Ozempic, and people never skip doses. It's religious. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of like, why is that? And so we're leaning
Hmm.
into behavioral psychology and cognitive neuroscience into thinking like, look, the reality is like for traditional medicines, you're kind of preventing a negative that people don't really know yet. Whereas with Ozempic, there's a very easy reward system. So how can
Hmm.
we leverage those things in a way that makes these behavioral changes compelling? Right. Because with Brian Johnson, you could tell someone that they have to go to sleep because they'll, that can make them, be healthier and restore brain function, all of
Hmm.
that. And all of that may be true, but still people won't do it,
Yeah. They
or
don't see
there's
the
like a
urgency.
balance. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So it's like, how can you balance it in the short term and then get people kind of brought up this curve to understand?
Mhm.
Like, even before a lot of research was done here, I mean, sleep is one of the newer ones, but for years and years, decades, people have known that nutrition and exercise, at least, are certainly important. Sleep
Yeah.
is relatively new in terms of
Mhm.
actually studied research. And yet people still don't really care about nutrition and exercise,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
obesity rates continue to go up. even
Yeah.
even in Europe, the obesity rates are catching up to the
Mhm.
US, and so therefore mortality is going down. And that's why Ozempic is actually a really incredible drug for the
Mhm.
people who are actually obese. Our goal is how can we leverage therapeutics to bring the people back to a quote unquote sort of healthy state, and then how can we use behavioral changes to continue that trajectory so that they can live kind of
Mhm.
healthier, longer, more fulfilling lives.
Yeah. And then I think there's a lot of data too, because I feel like for me, when I go to the doctor, you do your blood work and then you see some
Absolutely.
updates on the app. But I feel like it
Yeah.
should be, I've always thought there should be like a betterment for healthcare. So like, in real time,
Right.
like,
Right.
if you
Absolutely.
could just go somewhere and do your blood work and then you get some type of score, like, I don't think it's really there. Like, I mean, I got this app
It's
from
not.
like my hospital and it just gives me the
Yeah.
levels and
Totally.
but I think if there's more real time tracking, you're not waiting till
Totally.
it's too late. It's like, hey, you know what? Like, thanks for checking in 6 months ago. Now you have really high
Yeah.
blood pressure. Let's just give you some drugs, right? Where like I think if you
Absolutely.
got some real time, um, analytics on your current state compared to like where you should be, right, based on your ethnicity, based on your age, I feel like that's
Yeah.
definitely where it should be. But I haven't. I don't know if you've seen that, but um,
I love that you brought this up because it's definitely one of the most glaring issues right now is,
mhm.
and it's very difficult to fix because there's the regulatory side of hospitals and HIPAA regulations and privacy concerns, and then there's also this whole how can you collect data in a more seamless way insofar as blood tests are obviously very invasive, you can't do that yourselves. Excuse me, you can wear Aura, you can wear Whoop, but that doesn't give you the most compelling data. And continuous glucose monitors are coming to market, but they're very bulky. And so there's a huge problem right now in terms of data collection and data
Mhm.
aggregation that hasn't been solved. And kind of
Yeah.
exactly to your point, it's an area that we really want to we've been thinking very deeply about and want to invest in, but it's been hard. On the
Mhm.
aggregation side, there's an aggregation of hospital data and health data and historical data with family history. There's also an element of how can you aggregate data that you collect from all of your wearables and
Mhm.
MyFitnessPal and Strava, and is there a way to kind of consolidate all of that? You're right, it absolutely doesn't exist. And the other problem is there's a level of consumer education that isn't there yet and that we rely on a doctor for. And kind of to your point, you get a blood test and you see your LDL and you see that your cholesterol is XYZ, but then you get the LDL, HDL breakdown, but you don't really know what that
Yeah.
means. And so you have to go to the hospital, you have to
Hmm.
kind of search something up. And so there's another thought that we've been thinking about a lot, which is how can you provide additional context and insight into baselines? Because baselines are very useful,
Yeah.
but baselines in a void are not very interesting, right? That's sort of like, what is the rate of acceleration for certain baselines between point A and point B? If we think about traditional balance sheets, right? Like you can see how cash has moved from quarter to quarter, or
Yeah.
how shareholders' equity has changed, and you don't really get that right now. Certainly, you can't expect a consumer to compare one blood test from this year to the blood test from last year,
Yeah.
but the rate matters a lot. And exactly to your point, if we can get to a point where there's continuous or close to continuous monitoring, you can pull out really distinct insights of, oh, by the way, drinking affects XYZ before you
Hmm.
go to bed. Or if you eat too late, it affects XYZ. Or if you steam, it affects XYZ. And you can kind of see how all the variables and behavioral changes directly impact your life in a way that becomes gamifiable,
Hmm. Yeah.
insofar as, oh, you want to make sure that you feel higher energy. And these are the things that contribute to it. And so how can you adjust that? But that can only happen if you can monitor things on a continuous basis.
Yeah, I think Sam Altman announced something, I think a few weeks ago. It was like just a whole set of like custom GPTs. So it's like the GPT
Right.
wrapper around certain use cases. So for example, it's
Right.
like, look, if you have these levels, based on your blood work, usually your doctor will DM you in the healthcare app, right? And it's like, hey, do
Right.
this and do
Right.
this. But
Right.
I felt like it was kind of vague in my experience, and I actually went on
Yep.
Google and I actually went on
Yep.
ChatGPT to get more
Totally.
insight, and there was a little more like breadth in like just kind of getting that additional insights. Like, hey, these levels are this. Make sure you do this and this. And I feel like it's there's a whole use case for like co-pilots. Like it's like, hey, you know
Totally.
what? Like, did you eat 20 grams of protein today? Did you do this today? Hey, you know what? Like,
Yeah.
based on what you ate, looks like you ate a lot of salt. Like right now, you have to kind of manually enter that. So a lot of those diet
Absolutely.
apps,
Yeah.
you have to kind of like log your meals, and a lot of people are so busy they don't have time to like manually log it. So I feel like in the future, if there's some type of technology that's like implanted in your body or something where it just gives you
Yeah.
real-time data, I think that could be really interesting. And then just
Absolutely.
another basic use
I,
case. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I would love to hear this basic use case, but I just very, very um, quickly I do think that you have to make the user experience as frictionless as possible while
Hmm.
providing a lot of value. And the
Yeah.
hard part is you also want to make sure that it's not invasive and the form
Hmm.
factor and all of that. And so
Yeah.
it's a very, very difficult product to build.
Hmm.
Um, I am currently noodling on something that I won't disclose too much about, but
Hmm.
it revolves around using effectively continuous monitoring via video in order to glean certain insights.
Interesting.
I don't necessarily think you need to, I think the most compelling biomarkers can come from something that gets implanted, or like something that's in the first
Hmm.
layer of the skin, and
Yeah.
capture what's known as interstitial fluid.
Hmm.
Um, but for all of the behavioral things, exactly like what you're talking about, the amount of salt that you're consuming,
Hmm.
the food that you're eating, and all of that, maybe there's a world where you can wear glasses or something
Yeah,
that
it's
is
like, look,
able
we
to
hey,
capture
we
that
saw you
information.
snacking at 2 a.m. eating Cheetos at 2 a.m.
Exactly.
We see you doing that,
Exactly.
so don't do that. That was
Like
the
the
last night.
Aura can't tell that, the Whoop
Yeah.
can't tell that, but
Hmm.
you can leverage things in a way that could capture the things that you're doing in your
Hmm.
life.
Yeah.
And that certainly is useful. The vitals are obviously very, very
Yeah.
useful, but exactly that point, there's currently no way to capture either behavioral or
Hmm.
bodily data in a compelling, seamless, low friction way that doesn't require the consumer to be manually do a ton of things.
Yeah.
And so the form factor there is going to be one of the most important things for sure.
And then just another basic use case is like, look, is it going to rain today? And if it is, like, because right now all the weather apps, and maybe I didn't find the right one, but right now the weather apps just say, look, there's a 60% likelihood that it
Totally.
might rain. I just need
Right.
to know when I step out, should I bring an umbrella? And a lot of times,
Yeah.
like, you can't really tell. It's like not really
Sure.
that crystal clear
Exactly.
on, when you just Google like weather San Francisco, right?
Yeah.
It says, hey, you know
Yeah.
what, this is the forecast, but do I need to bring an umbrella or not? So I feel like
Totally.
it's
Yeah.
just
It's
simplifying that user experience to just say, hey, bring an umbrella,
totally.
You don't really need
Yeah.
to know the probability of rain, but
Right.
hey, you should, it's going to rain at 6, so just bring an umbrella with you.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a powerful use case because
Yeah.
this is where the what you were saying earlier, I think becomes very relevant is people who have that commercial experience and that commercial touch. I'm
Hmm.
very much so of the belief that at the end of the day, everything is a consumer product. Insofar as at
Hmm.
the end of the day, you're always interacting with the consumer. And so,
Yeah.
like, if you just think about a consumer is not an expert at probability is like we've trained ourselves to understand like what percentage should we bring an umbrella or at
Hmm.
what time or
Yeah.
whatever. But that's not how people think. Like you can
Yeah.
give someone a whole dashboard of data and it's like if you have no idea, people don't want to go through the effort of doing
Yeah.
all of that, and you can't just think like, oh well, a scientist would like this.
Yeah.
Well, who
Hmm.
cares? Like
Yeah.
the majority of the world are not scientists.
Yeah.
So
But
why are you
but the
building a
use case that
product
you
that is
said, hey, you know what? Like, based on the camera footage, you're eating Cheetos at 2 a.m. Don't do that. It's not good for
exactly,
you.
exactly, exactly?
So yeah.
And it's yeah, it's how do you simultaneously educate and provide valuable insights that don't require the user to do a lot of additional lift on their end
Hmm.
and go through that sort of mental, you know,
Hmm.
gymnastics to get to a decision. I mean, there's so many decisions that we already have to make on any given day. We need to cut that out. We need to cut that out and make it as seamless as possible.
Sure. No, absolutely. Well, hey, Nathan, this was amazing. Thanks for being part of the community. Thanks for being generous with your time, and
Absolutely.
excited to connect soon.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll see you in New
Yeah.
York.
Yeah. Absolutely. Catch up soon. Bye.
All right. Bye.